Are you looking for inspiration to be a better dad, a better husband, a better coach to your family? If so, you're in the right place. Welcome to the Domestic Dad Podcast, where we go beyond the surface, diving into open, honest, candid conversations with people from all walks of life, discussing things dads worry about, but don't typically talk about. We'll cover subjects like sobriety, addiction, and getting unstuck to day-to-day stresses of the world that can so easily overcome us, with the hope that we inspire those conversations to start happening so we can start cleaning up the messes we've made along the way. I'm Nick, founder of the Domestic Dad Project, a brand that strives to create a community that breaks the stigma around dads reaching out for help to get their lives back on track and become better fathers. I've been a father since I was 18 years old. I'm also a trauma survivor, alcoholic, divorced, happily remarried, proud, hardworking, humbled by life, domestic dad. In the pit of addiction, I struggled with my own mental health in some of the darkest ways imaginable, but I found my way out. With the help of community resources, mentors, and willpower. My hope is that this podcast inspires you to join our growing community. So let's grab them up and start cleaning up the mess. All right. Chad Weyland. Welcome to the Domestic Dad Project podcast.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here. I've read a little bit about what you guys are doing and heard from you what you're doing. It's encouraging for myself to hear that, and now I've got a spot to go to listen to other people. I think it's good to be continuously encouraged, but to also encourage others with where I've been and where God's taken me.
Yeah. Well, let's start with where you've been. Tell me what your childhood was like for you.
So I grew up, I come from Gilbertville, Iowa, a small town, small farming community. I grew up in a Catholic community. Both of my parents worked. My mom worked in the healthcare industry. My dad worked for the phone company. So I didn't go without anything. I have an older brother, Brad, that's a year older, a sister, Christy, that's 5 years older. But life was good for me. Small town. I grew up wrestling, playing baseball. My dad coached most of the things we did. Just they were involved. But I don't, looking back now, I always tell people I came from a good home, which I did, meaning I didn't go without. My parents, we were middle class. My parents provided everything we needed and then some. But looking back now, I didn't have, when I say a good home to me today is a home that raised in a Christian home. And I was raised in a Catholic community, but God was never a part of my life, never the central theme in our home. So life was good, really, overall, when I think about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Same. I feel the same. Like it was like you always had a sport to participate in.
Yep.
At least I did. It sounds like it was the same for you. What were your parents like?
So my dad, it's funny that you asked that question because I see now with my son that I'm a lot like my dad.
Yeah.
the things that maybe bothered me about my dad, or I thought he was, my dad was, like I said, always involved. My dad loved sports, loved the things we were doing. He was a baseball player. He didn't wrestle, but he got involved, would come to everything I did. He worked hard, to provide the things we needed. But that was really, as far as it went. As I got older, he told me he just did things the way that his dad did. And he thought to just provide for us what we needed: food, clothing, shelter. He loved us. I don't want to say he didn't, but he wasn't really involved with anything other than that. He did a lot of the things that he did, played softball. So we'd go to softball tournaments, which was okay, but he was good. He was patient for the most part until it came to teaching us something.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if it was schoolwork or baseball or anything that he was trying to teach me, and I wasn't really receptive of it or thought I knew better, he was short fused. But he was there. My mom was the same way. My mom, she loved us. Definitely. My mom loved us. She'd pick us up. She'd kiss us, hug us, tell us she loved us. But I can't really think of involvement as a parent the way that I understand a parent to be. and the involvement with my son, how I need to guide him. I don't feel I ever had that. And by no fault of their own, they were doing what they always say what their parents did for them.
Right.
So, but they were good parents. They loved us. We were definitely um, loved and provided for as far as physical things went. Um, as far as guidance went, I feel there's a difference. Maybe they tried, but I just wasn't. Um, as I got older, um, my parents got divorced. I was 11, so things really changed for me then. I can remember feeling torn between going to live with my mom or live with my dad. Now they were only 3 miles apart, but all of my friends were in Gilbertville, where my dad was. So I chose to go there. But I saw that I to this day I can remember feeling just completely torn, my heart torn out, seeing what it did to my mom to not be with her. So, but overall, to answer your question, my parents were good people.
Yeah.
They loved us and cared for us and provided very well for us.
Yeah. What about school? How'd you do at school? What was that like for you?
I loved school because I got to wrestle, got to play baseball. And when I was younger, I did well in school. I mean, I was smart when I tried, but I never gave until I was a. This will give you a little insight. Until I was a junior in high school, I never read a book. I mean, I could read, but I never physically sat down and read a book when you'd have to do a book report or anything else. I never read a book until I had a teacher as a junior in high school encourage me to read. Therefore, I could participate and enjoy class a lot more. And I did. And I actually learned that I love to read. So um, I got by in school.
Yeah.
I ended up not graduating on time and getting my GED because I was one credit short. So that'll tell you a little bit about it. I was lazy.
Yeah.
Wrestling and baseball were what I was interested in, and I had to do schoolwork to be able to participate in those things. So I did. That would be an easy way to say it.
Yeah. Sounds like you had a pretty good childhood.
I did.
Yeah.
I did.
Yeah, man. Did you ever take me into like early adult life then? Take me into kind of where, when you started working,
Okay.
that all that good stuff.
So when I got out of school, obviously I didn't graduate on time. So when most people were going to college, I knew my dad told me, you're either going to go to college or you're going to get a job.
Same.
You're going to have to get a job. And I had no understanding of what it was going to be like to have a job, but I got hired at Omega Cabinets.
Yeah.
And I think it was making $8 or $9 an hour. And that was like,
good.
That's good money. Or so I thought, if you show up every day. But so I started there. And I worked. I mean, I don't know where it came from. Because my dad didn't push us to work when we were kids. My mom didn't push us to like work. I did things around the house, but I just had a sense of responsibility from the first job that I had to do a good job, to learn it. And I liked what I was doing. I liked the woodworking, like being, learning what was going on at Omega. I'd heard a lot about it growing up. Um, so I was excited to do it. And I just remember from that age, wanting to be at the top. I wanted to be the guy that was in charge. And I didn't know what that would
color.
take. Yeah. And that kind of went with wanting everything, wanting more, wanting to be the boss, but am I willing to do what it takes to get there? And I wasn't at that time. I had no understanding. I'd miss work and wouldn't feel bad about it because I was doing things I wanted to do. I was 18 years old, and I thought, somebody will take care of me. My parents will take care of me. And they did.
Mm-hmm.
They allowed me to basically do what I was doing. I would spend my money on things I wanted, and they would take care of it. So,
yeah. When did the problems all start?
So the problem started early for me. My sister was dating a guy when I was 18 years old. I'd been at Omega for, I don't know, 3 or 4 months. And my brother was into drugs already, but I didn't have a close relationship with him. He moved out when he was 16, 17.
Yeah.
So I had that connection, but my sister was dating a guy too. And I went to a party at my brother's house. I was innocent. I had never used drugs, and I very rarely drank in high school. I just didn't like it. But I went to a party at my brother's house, and I remember this guy my sister was dating said, "Hey, take a hit of this," and I had no idea what it was. I'm like, "Yeah, I'll take a hit of it." Took a hit of it, and I'm like, "Yeah, it was okay," but I knew that I had been drinking and I was sober. Well, I come to find out it was crack cocaine.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah,
How old were you?
I was 18,
Oh,
18 years old.
oh.
Um, and luckily at that point I had no money, no means to be able to get it. I didn't know where to get it. I was a small town kid from
Right.
Gilbertville. I didn't even know what it
Ignorance
was.
is bliss at that point.
Yeah, yeah. So thankfully I had no way or means to get it. And so a few years passed, and I started using methamphetamine with my brother shortly after that because he's like, you don't want to use that stuff anyway. Just crackheads use that.
Yeah, pop culture would tell you that that's
Yep.
bad.
Yeah, that's
Use meth instead.
Yes, that was very good. You've heard that before. So that's what it was. So that's what I did. But that didn't last very long. I knew I started using meth, and I remember the first time I was up for 7 days straight, and I'm like,
Wow.
this is crazy. What am I doing? So it was very short lived, maybe a month or two. I wasn't living it with my mom and dad, and just seeing the environment that it created, the people that it brought around. Not that I was any better than any of them, but at the time I thought I was. I'm like,
Sure.
I'm 18 years old, just got out of high school. What am I doing? So I left. I went back with my mom. I ended up getting a job at Birch Cabinet, where I did very well. I'm like, I had a small taste of what using drugs was like, and I'm like, I don't know, thank you. So I worked my way up at Birch. I was there for a short time. I worked my way up to a foreman. And my life, I felt like, completely changed. Um, Looking back now, nothing really changed other than that I wasn't using drugs. I didn't have an opportunity to use drugs or the money. That ultimately, a year and a half, 2 years later, my position at Birch provided. Um, so at about 20 years old, I started going down a road. Same guy that offered it to me the first time, I used it with again, and I don't know why to this day. I don't. I remember the first time I used it. I'm like, that's okay, but it's not. I wasn't really interested in it. I wasn't interested in the meth, but I remember. I remember the day. I don't remember the date, but I remember the day that I went to his house and I had plenty of money. So I'm like, I got $300. Let's go get some crack. Um, and he said, I was like, yeah, let's go. And I remember that day, it was the first time I did something in my life. I got, I believe that time I got high for the first time. I actually felt the effect of crack.
Right, because the first time that you had used it, you had been drinking
I'd been
alcohol. You were
drinking
probably bombed, and then it just brought you back to
Yep.
level, huh?
Yep. And
Yeah.
I remember that $300 was gone like that. And I was so high that I wanted more. Um, and I remember it was that time that from that day forward, I couldn't not think about it. I couldn't stop thinking about it, and I was hooked on it. And that took me on a path of destruction for the next 10 years.
Wow.
Yeah, in and out of prison.
Tell me
Yeah.
about that.
So it started. It started with me losing my job at Birch because I had gone a couple years with perfect attendance, great worker, on time, reliable, to not showing up because I'm up all night smoking crack. And it got to the point, so I lost my job. Pretty soon, unemployment ran out, or the $300 I would get a week at the time for unemployment wasn't cutting it because I could spend that in a day easy on cocaine. So it turned to stealing. If it wasn't bolted down, I was taking it. It didn't matter who you were. I would pawn things, steal things, mainly, from anybody, but mainly from my family.
Yeah.
There was a lot of damage done. Um, I can remember breaking into my dad's house and stealing a book of checks, a new book of checks while he's gone to work and I'm gone. And all day long, I'm writing checks to or a gas station for 20 over, 25 over, 40 over, whatever they would let me do, until that book of checks was gone that day. And not, and not caring, not even thinking about it, just thinking, this is what I've got to do to get by. I'll deal with the consequences later. Um, Knowing and hoping that my dad wouldn't press charges against me, and he didn't. But there were several other incidents like that. Very good friends of mine, close people that loved me, that were friends for most of my life, that did the same thing with, that ultimately, thankfully, did press charges, because that was the only thing that was going to stop me from what I was doing.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a whole nother story in itself. Is, I could talk about for days and weeks the number of relationships I destroyed, people that I hurt, lied to, stole from, robbed, whatever you want to call it, to continue to provide my need for cocaine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, wow, that's a lot.
Yeah.
That's a lot to process, man.
Yeah.
Have you ever gone back and just been like reconciled any of that stuff with those people?
Yeah, thank God, through, and we'll get to that probably in some of the later questions, but through God's grace, actually, is the only thing. God has used the things I've recently been through in the last 10 years to completely restore the majority of those relationships. Some are relationships with people in the past that I've tried to, and I've wanted to, and I still think about reconciling. Some of them aren't willing, have written me off, and that's okay. I understand that, and that's their right to do so.
Yeah.
In my heart, I wish that they would forgive me. And there are things that I allowed to drive me for several years, like in anger. Like, well, you think that's bad? Watch this.
Yeah.
You think that was bad? Watch what I do now. Um, and when I think about it now, it's so twisted and clouded. Um, but yes, thank God, the relationships with my family have all been restored, and probably to a deeper and more loving way than they ever have been.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah,
It's kind of like scorched earth, and then you can regrow something much more beautiful,
yes.
right?
Very good. Very
Tell
well
me
put.
about it. Tell me about it. I want to circle back to all of that stuff. So maybe I did just jump ahead of myself
That's
there
okay.
a little bit. Tell me about a moment that you, like, in the midst of, the use of crack or cocaine or whatever it was, that you have the most regret.
Ooh. I read that, was looking through, sifting through some of these, and I thought, man, there's so many of them to pinpoint one,
I know.
to feel like
Same.
you're,
Me too.
because just vocalizing it, like, am I not doing justice to this? I would have to say probably the one that stands out for me the most while I was using crack was probably just the fact that I would rob my own parents.
Yeah.
And not just once, not just twice, not 3 times. Um, and to see what just the hurt on my dad, but it was a whole different level to see um, that you can tear your own mother's heart out and just um, and be okay with it. Not really be okay with it, but and do it repeatedly. Um, to watch what it did to her, because she wanted to help me and she would do anything she could to help me. Um, that's probably the most regret that I have. I remember doing it time and time again. I'd take a check and write it for $300 and think, she's got the money, she doesn't care. But that wasn't the point. The point was that I would steal from my own mother, when she was willing to give me anything, and did, um, just to see the hurt that it caused, repeatedly, and to think that I would do it, and sometimes that I was so sick that I would giggle about, really giggle about, man, I can't believe it. I can't believe it, that I can get away with this. But that would be it. If I could pinpoint one, like I said, from using cocaine, because there's several others, um, with methamphetamine, maybe not on that scale, stealing from people, but that would be it. Because I think about it a lot. Just the hurt that I caused her, the pain that I caused her, and not for 1 or 2 years, but for 20 years, 20 some years of my life. And being a parent now, it's even more, um, it's right there for me to think, man, if my son did that, that would crush me. Um, to think that he could do that. But yeah, that would be it.
Oh, you got me emotional, man.
Yeah.
Like I'm over here like, oh, because mothers are important, you know,
Yeah.
moms are important.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, give me a sec. Um, tell me, tell me about it when you started to notice like that wasn't like it was obviously when you're using crack cocaine and stealing from your mom, that's not normal. Um, when did you start to know like, hey, this is it's probably like a serious addiction?
It was, it was, it was very early on. Shortly after I lost my job, within a month or two of losing my job, I had cashed in my 401k, and I don't remember how many thousands of dollars it was.
Call it 10.
Yeah.
Call it 20. Somewhere
And
in
it
there.
was gone. I remember it was gone within 2 or 3 weeks, and I had all the cash in my hand, and I thought, man, this is going to be great. Um, but then I remember each day thinking, I'm only going to spend this much money. I'm only going to spend this much money. And within 2 or 3 weeks, that 10 grand, if you call it that, it was roughly that, was gone. And I'm like, what am I going to do now? But I knew there was a problem before that because I couldn't stop thinking about it. I couldn't wait to get off work to go do it before I lost my job. I was scheming on ways to come up with money because I was broke. So I knew it was a problem, but it consumed me. It was the first time in my life I made a choice to do something that I could not control. I mean, I had made poor choices in my life, but they were never things that were as devastating as that choice was to use and then to continue to use. And I could not stop. It didn't matter what, it didn't matter.
Yeah.
The hurt, the pain, the lies, the thieving didn't matter. I was going to continue to do it. And at that point, I really didn't have any serious consequences. I was charged with felony forgery, but I had never been in trouble before that. So I think I got charged with 5 counts of forgery, and I ended up on probation. So even at that point, I hadn't had a lot of um, criminal repercussions. So, but I knew it was a problem early on,
Yeah.
very early on,
Yeah.
because it consumed me.
Kind of those indicators along the way. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
All right, man. That's this is a bit abnormal,
Yeah.
you know. Did you ever get sick?
I did. I mean, there was times that I was physically, there was nothing left of me. I was uh, probably in the shape that I'm in now. And within a month or two, people are like, is he sick? What's wrong with him?
Does he have cancer?
Yes, is something wrong with him?
Yeah.
And I'm like, no, I just stopped working out. But I mean, I'm looking in the mirror and I can see that I'm physically wasting away. And then my pants are, your belt's doubled over, your pants are folding over. And I'm like, oh, and people knew. They're like, what is, but nobody suspected that I was using drugs at that point.
You were really good at hiding it.
I thought I was.
Yeah.
But I don't know how it could have been. Only because people didn't know me. They didn't, and at that point, I didn't have a history of using drugs or having any problems. All they knew is here's a kid that came here 2 years ago to get a job. He worked his way up to foreman. People like him. He's reliable. He's a good guy. He works out. He's got his life together. To literally within a matter of months, completely at the bottom of the pile, face sinking in, all their muscle mass gone, and you're just hanging on. No money for lunch, no lunch. Yeah.
Wow.
So.
Yeah. With alcohol, for me, it was like on the other end of the spectrum. I would get bloated, right? And I would look in the mirror and I'd be like, who is this guy? Like, did you ever have those moments looking in the mirror like, what happened?
Yes, there was.
Like, this is not the person who I thought I looked like.
No.
It's changed dramatically in the last 6 months. Something's off here.
There was something about the sickness or psychologically that I could look in the mirror and I'm like, you don't look that bad. But I'm looking and I'm like, you could see some muscle features before, and now it's like I'm built like a stovepipe, and I'm like, I don't know that bad, do I?
Yeah.
And in your head, but you can tell yourself that lie that I don't. People don't really notice, do they?
Yeah, I'd stop looking in the mirror and then I'd go take a shot. You know what I mean? I'd be like, I'm fine. It's fine.
Yeah.
You know?
Really quickly on that. My wife will bring up pictures recent, like now, she'll be on her phone and she'll, oh, look at this picture, and
Yes.
I can't look at them because at that time, this is when I was using meth. I thought, man, I look good. When she shows me those pictures now, I don't even want to see them, and it makes me sad to know that a lot of the pictures I have with my son when he was younger, before I went to prison, uh, I look. I mean, it's obvious that I was abusing something. My skin pasty, um, cheeks sunk in, like, and I thought I looked good. I really did.
Yeah.
I thought nobody knows. How
Yeah.
did everybody not know?
Dude, addiction has a way of writing itself all over you, while hiding itself to you in that moment. I have family photos where I know I was drinking beforehand.
Yeah.
There are pictures, like, and the pictures span like years, where you would, I know I was drunk in that picture.
Yeah.
I know I was nearly blackout drunk in that picture.
Wow.
And when they come up on your phone, like there's a feature on iPhones where, like, if you swipe right, it's like your featured photos, right? And it's like maybe the ones that have been edited or like that my wife has shared with me or whatever. And I'll look at them like yourself, exactly the same thing. I'm like, I was drunk. Gosh, I'm bloated. Gosh, this isn't right. But I thought in those moments, like, that I was okay.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? I thought, oh, that's a good picture of me in those moments.
Yeah.
So exact same like thought process. And it's so crazy to me because I do think that's just addiction can lie to you, man.
Absolutely. That's one thing that I've always, and it's still today, I can't wrap my head around, but I get it. And I know that it's the power of addiction. When I'm a full blown drug addict, I know that. I accept it. I've got no shame in saying that today. That's part of what is freeing about it, being able to say that, knowing it and vocalizing it. But I could never understand, and I still can't, even though I'm an addict, how I could go I choose not to, but I could go drink 1 or 2 beers and be good and leave, or not drink at all. But I don't understand when somebody can't stop drinking, but I'm an addict. That's the power of it.
Yeah.
I'm like, what do you mean? What's the problem? Just have a beer or 2 beers and go. Now I get it because I've drank my fair share, but the power of addiction is so, let's say, it's cunning, it's baffling.
Oh, it
because
is.
I'm an addict, but I look at somebody who has a drinking problem, and I'm like, gosh, I don't understand that. Just as they may not understand how I can not use drugs. They may just be an alcoholic, and they look at drugs and go, why would you want to do that?
Oh, dude, for me, if I had a beer, that's Pandora's box, man. If
Oh, yeah.
I open that door, there's no chance I get it shut ever again, like ever again. And I have done so much work and put in so much time to getting that door closed, locked, dead bolted, put the shaft down in front of it, like buried things up to it. You know what I mean? Like I have closed and hidden that door from my life. I also have an NA beer. I also have a mocktail.
Sure.
And that's just a me thing.
Sure.
But that would be like, hey man, do you want to go hit this crack pipe real quick one time? For me, that's how that would be. Because as soon as that happened for me, there would be 2 liters of Pinnacle vodka sitting in my liquor cabinet upstairs, and then the next thing you know, there would be like there would be drawers in this room full of like empty liquor bottles is what it would be for me. So like it's just like, oh man.
Yeah.
So I don't know if
that led me down that road 100 times. So I thought I had the door closed, had it locked, had things staffed on top of it. And then I'm like, you know what? It's been 6 months since I've smoked.
Yeah.
I bet I can just get high this weekend.
Yeah.
And I'd be back in jail or prison within a month every time. And I did
lying to yourself.
Absolutely.
It wasn't. I messed up this one thing.
Yeah, I got my life together now.
Yeah.
I'll probably be okay.
Yeah, that's what it was like with alcohol for me too. It was I'd get sober for like a week and I'd be like, oh man, I feel great. I can do this. I'm good. I'm golden.
Then right back at it.
And then like one beer turned into a six pack turned into a cocktail, a dirty martini turned into a bottle of vodka sitting in the fridge, and then it was off to the races.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And then I remember this one time it was like 3 months. I had gone 3 months and I was like, I'm sober now. I can drink again. I went to a bachelor party in Phoenix. I was sitting in the airport with a guy, and he's like, I'll have a vodka soda. And I was like, it's time. I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. I got that vodka soda. I ordered a double, by the way. First drink in 3 months.
Why wouldn't you?
Yeah, why wouldn't I? If I'm gonna cut loose, right? Like, so I got that sucker and I'm sitting there. I looked at it for like 30, 45 seconds too. I raised it to my lips and very slowly took that first drink. By the time that plane hit Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport, I was near blackout drunk.
No kidding.
And my previous employer was actually on the plane, and he is sober, and he knew that I had been working on getting sobriety. It was him and his wife. He got off the plane. I'm, just I don't remember what I said, but I could tell, like in my head, it went from at the beginning of the flight where I wasn't totally tanked to at the end of the flight, I had all these things in my head where, is he condescendingly thinking about me? Is he, are there things happening in his head? What, I'm the victim here. You know what I mean? Like there was a lot of stuff that started to bubble back up, and then the bender went. I remember flying home and I couldn't like not shake from that stuff.
That quick.
Yeah. That quick. That just a weekend, man. Just a weekend. I mean, we didn't go to bed, like it was on. So yeah. I don't know if you had any of those.
I've had my share of it.
Yeah.
Thinking, like I said, it didn't, I never, when I got into, and I know we'll get there, but in my meth use, I never got there because I never stopped. Yeah. That was an ongoing thing for years.
Yeah. So I want to get into that because I think that's a whole nother side of the story, isn't it?
Yep.
Before we go there, with where you were at and like flirting with sobriety and getting sober and then coming back to it, when you would come back to it, and this is what, for me anyways, that's when the mental health started to like hurt me, because I knew at that point that there was an addiction, right? I always knew there was an addiction. I just didn't admit it, right? Yeah. Like I'm not an alcoholic. I'm not a drug addict. I'm not, because I'm saying that I'm not. But then once I knew that it was, and I was in this like on the hamster wheel and I couldn't get off.
Yeah.
Right. That's when the mental health stuff started to happen. The anxiety, the depression, I think, and like the self-deprecation. Did you go through any of that stuff?
Absolutely. So again, looking back now, thank God that there were people. Now I know that God was putting people in my life along the way. It was, whether it be through an NA program, AA program, wherever it was, there was people in my life that helped me through those times. People who were willing to invest in my life when my family and people that loved me had enough. Not that they weren't willing to help me if I was going to help myself, because I would go through things. I mean, when you're coming off crack cocaine, the depression alone, the withdrawal alone puts you into tremendous depression. And then you've got the guilt and the shame of everything that I've done. On top of that, and that I was unhealthy physically. But there were a number of things, that suicidal thoughts continuously, and just thinking, man, I'm going to tell you how sick I was. A lot of people have laughed when I've told them this, but it's the honest to God's truth. When I say, I would think, man, I'm just going to get as high as I can, and I'm going to do whatever I'm going to do, because when I'm done with this bender, I'm just going to end my life. I did that a number of times, but in my head, believing I'm either going to try to get so high that I don't wake up, that I have a stroke, or that something happens, or I'm just going to end it. So I'm going to go out with a bang. But then I would end up passing out or doing whatever I was doing, waking up, living in that guilt, living in that shame. But I went through a number of, I would be in, I think it's 3 East at Allen or one of them in the
Yep.
psych ward. I would end up there before they would haul me back to jail. Or, I went through a dual diagnosis program at the facility for depression, anxiety. It was a 6-month program for people who abuse drugs. And so, yes, I faced a number of those things, but I never stuck with, I never stuck with anything that they would give me long enough or stay clean long enough to really get balanced out. About the time that I would start to get healthy or think I was healthy, I felt good because physically I had recovered. Mentally, I had got to a place like, okay, I'm going to get my life together again. I've got some opportunities. Things will work out for me. Um, and so I think I'm good. I don't need that depression medicine. I don't need this. I don't need that. Um, but sooner or later it would fall apart again. But yes, I absolutely went through that, and for a lot of years, that was what allowed me to stay right in that hole that I was in. I felt depressed. I felt ashamed. I felt anxiety about life and how am I going to do this? How am I going to take care of all this mess that I've created? And it would just keep me right down in that hole, and it would allow me to keep using, keep using, keep using. So, yes.
Yeah. Yeah, it was the hard stuff. Um, Talk to me about starting your journey into sobriety.
Well, so originally it started. I could talk about the earlier times, but I'm gonna go move forward to where what has led me to where I'm at today, if
Yeah.
that's okay.
Yeah, I'm
Because
totally okay with
to
that.
me that's the most important. Because for a number of years I tried to get sober. I met some really good people who I'm still friends with today who are sober, who have been sober for 15, 20, 25 years. It and programs worked for them. Um, I can't say that they never worked for me because I never really gave them a fair chance. But all I know is that today, my journey in sobriety started um, when I was indicted by the federal government.
Whew. Yeah, let's go there.
Yeah. So I'll back up a little bit because it puts it's going to make everything line up. So when my wife, and I'll make this quick, when my wife and I got married and she found out she was pregnant, we were going to have a baby. She said, "I want to raise our son in a Christian home." And I came from a Catholic community, which I totally despised. And I'm like, no, that no. First of all, I don't know what that means. Second of all, I came from a Catholic community, no, because that's what my relation to it was. Anyway, um, she said, "Well, there's a church right over here, Candeo Church." Was only like a mile from where we were living at the time, over off West Fourth. Um, and I'm like, "You go ahead. I'm not going to go." Well, ultimately, I went, and so ultimately, that's a whole story that we may get into later. But so Paul Sabino, that church pursued me. They didn't know where I was at in my life really, but they knew that I had a history of drug abuse, prison, and they welcomed me with open arms. But ultimately, through that relationship, I met with Paul Sabino, a lead pastor of the church, one day at Doy Joy's Pizza when it was still in Cedar
Yeah.
Falls,
Yeah.
and I was saved that day. People had been pouring into me, but the gospel, it wasn't. I understood that they're saying that salvation is a gift, free gift. You just have to receive it. And I'm like, I get it, but it's just
Huh?
I don't get it. I get it, but I don't get it. I don't know why that day. It was a Tuesday, October of 2015, right? The Tuesday before Halloween. I don't remember what the exact date was. It'd be the 29th. But I was saved that day, and there's no doubt in my mind that I was saved. So just keep that in your mind. So fast forward 8 months to May 6th, 2016. The federal government had an indictment for me, and my home and several other homes in Iowa. I think 16 or 17 homes were raided at one time. Uh, and my journey kind of starts there too. Not only redemption, but God using me, God shaping me. So I was indicted. I ended up going to Cedar Rapids is a federal holding for the Northern District of Iowa. So I was there. And you want to talk about shame, guilt, depression, all of those things. Um, so I didn't know at the time. I went to my initial appearance that morning, and I was facing 30 years to life
Whoa.
in federal prison um, for my charge alone. And then in the federal system, they take your criminal history into account when sentencing you. So, and I had at that point 56 criminal charges in state, um, so 11 felonies, I think. So that was all going to come into account. But anyway, I end up in jail in federal holding, and they're not gonna release me. Very few people get released, but I knew that I was not going to get
You weren't
released.
one of the special ones that were going
No,
to get out of there.
I wasn't that guy that got picked up on a kind of a simple charge, but it turned into a felony or a felony charge, and then they're like, oh, he's got a job, he's got a family, he
Yeah.
pays it. No, that wasn't me. As much as I pleaded for that, that wasn't going to happen. So, and I was living. I just have to note that I was living a complete lie at that time. My wife suspected that I was using drugs again because of my behaviors, and which were probably very obvious.
But she had
But
given you so much grace that,
yep, and she had no idea that I had gotten back into selling um, meth on a large scale that I was previously involved in. Um, so
I
I'm
don't know if you want to unpack that at all. If you don't, that's
Yeah, I
I'm
do.
okay.
That
All right.
it doesn't bother me because it brings the story to light. But I can circle back to that.
Okay.
So how I got on this journey. So I'm living a complete lie. My wife doesn't know but I know that my door gets kicked in at 6 in the morning, and she's carrying my son down the steps to AR-15s pointed at her, um, and they're federal government swarming my house, DEA, state police, and I'm not even there. It's her coming downstairs carrying my son, and they're like got their ARs pointed at her. So I don't know any of this at the time. All I know is I'm um, taken to jail, and I hadn't seen her or heard from her or anybody um, in it was about a week and a half maybe. And I can remember the desperation and the hopelessness and helplessness that I felt. I wasn't afraid of going to prison. I'd spent most of my life in prison. I knew that I could do that. But I'm looking at this and I'm going,
Oh,
the
man.
best thing that I could do right now is go in that cell and hang myself, just end my life. That would be the best thing for my son. It'd be the best thing for my family, for my wife, because I was such a not only an embarrassment, but I'm just like here I am again. My name was all over the news as being that I was the ringleader distributing methamphetamine all across Northeast Iowa and into Minnesota, Wisconsin. That I was the ringleader. I was the one behind it all, which I was. But at that time, I'm looking and thinking, this is what my family sees. They're the ones that are going to have to answer all this. And it was a coward move, but I thought this is what I'm going to do. It's the best thing I could do. So they brought the dinner trays at like 5 o'clock every night. You'd have to go lock down for an hour before they'd bring them. So I thought at 4 o'clock when I go in there, I'm going to tear this bed sheet up. I'm going to make a noose. I'm going to tie a noose. And I had already figured out how I could get it behind. In jails, they have the any hook made to break away. So you can't do that. Well, I was crafty enough to be able to fish my line up through the back of that where they had it mounted to the brick. So I'm like, I've got my spot. So I go up there at 4 o'clock and I start tearing my sheet. And I'm thinking, I had fought for several years in mixed martial arts. So I knew like I could choke. I knew that being choked out wasn't going to be a problem. I could hold my breath long enough and let that noose tighten up long enough that it would just be over. Uh, and I did. I thought, this is the best thing that I could do. So I go up there and I tear that sheet and I get it. And I remember I was crying thinking, this is what I've got to do. My wife will be better off. My son will be better off. I'm going to do this. Um, because I don't want, for number one, I'm a coward and I don't want to feel this way anymore. Um, Two, they shouldn't have to deal with this. So I remember sitting down and I was taking as many deep breaths as I could so I could get until I got lightheaded to the point that I could just lean against the wall and just sit and let it tighten on my throat as long as I could. And I knew it would be over. Well, I did. And I just remember going black and thinking, I'm good. This is gonna be good. Well, about I remember being woken up. I remember waking up vaguely in in the ambulance, and then at in the hospital in Cedar Rapids in ICU. At They had me in a MRI tube doing MRIs in my neck, and I say all this to know that um, this is the point in my life that was the worst point in my life, but ultimately from like the next day turns into my life completely changing. Because today, I can get emotional sometimes when I think about it, when I really dig and think about where I was at. But the only thing I see today is what God has done with it from the minute I woke up there, being shackled and cuffed to a hospital gurney bed in ICU, thinking I can't even get that right. I couldn't even get that right. You know what?
You were doing it wrong.
Yeah. How did uh, I don't want to say it because I don't need to, but I'm how did I this up?
Right.
I can't even get this right. So anyway, that's where my journey to not only redemption, but God's grace and my recovery, actually recovery for the first time in my life started. So when I wake up there, there's a sheriff's deputy sitting over there, and I'm crying because I'm just sick. I'm thinking, man, I just that up the one chance I had. So he looks at me, and the first thing he says, so mind you, I had been saved 8 months prior, but my life didn't change. But there's no doubt in my mind that at that point, I was saved. There was something in my heart that changed, and God opened my not only my heart, but my eyes to see my desperate need for Him. I didn't know how desperate at that time, but I understood the gospel message. I understood salvation without a doubt. But I was so involved in what I was doing, selling drugs, and living that lifestyle, that I pushed all of those things to the side. That wasn't what the important part of my life was. But at this point, so I wake up in intensive care, and here's a sheriff's deputy sitting there, and I'm sick. And he looks at me and he said, I normally don't talk to anybody in here. He said, but I can see that you're hurting. And I'm just like, you think? And he says, I want you to know something. He said, I don't know where you're going, and I don't know how long you're going there for. He said, but I want you to know something. He said, God loves you. And he said, and he has a plan for your life. And he said, and I know one thing, your son needs you. He said, I don't know where your marriage is going to go, but your son needs you, and he's always going to need you. Yeah. He said, and I know that because my mother was a drug addict, and she's not here anymore. He said, but I still love her. I still need her. I still miss her. Yeah. And he said, and I believe that God will use you if you allow him to. So this is, and it's something you can't make up. So he says that, and I remember when we were going back to jail, I was there for a couple of days. And he ended up being the one that ended up transporting me back to the jail. And I just thought of this the other day after I talked to you. I remember him saying to me when he dropped me back off at the jail, they're like, the administrator and everybody's like, he's got to go into isolation, suicide watch, where I would be for the next year and a half. But anyway, I remember this guy very clearly saying, they're like, what's going on? And he looked at me, and he looked at the other deputy before he locked the door, and he said, Chad's going to be okay. And I'm thinking, you have no idea. How am I going to be okay? But he believed that. So then they put me in isolation, and the jail's overcrowded. So they put me in a cell, and I'm in there, and I get there, and I can't have a book. I can't have anything. I'm in this Velcro suit. I'm on a cement slab because they take all of your pillows, they take your mattress, they take all your blankets, and it's cold in there. So they give you this turtle suit, they call it. And I go into this cell, and I absolutely lose it. And I'm just screaming. And I said, God, I don't know what you want. I literally hit my knees, and I'm screaming. I said, God, I don't know what you want from me, but whatever you want, I'll do it. Okay. I can't do this anymore. I can't do it. Whatever you want from me, I'll do. And I'm bawling, and I'm thinking, just give me a chance to end my life again. Let me go to the shower. let me cut my wrist, whatever I got to do. That's what I'm thinking. But I'm crying out to God, please, whatever you want from me, I'll do. Please, just whatever you want. And I go through that day, or maybe it was later that day. I can't remember exactly. But all I know is I'm laying there and I'm sick. And they open the door, and the sergeant says, I hate to do this, but the jail's really overcrowded, and he's got to have somewhere to go too. And I look up as I'm like balled up in my turtle suit cold, and I look up and she goes, the good news is we're going to give you your mattress because there's going to be two of you in here. Two of us, mind you, in a 6x12 cell that's meant for one person and one bunk. So somebody's going to have to sleep on the floor. But anyway, I look up and here's this guy, white hair, and he just looks at me like he's not loving this any more than I am. But I look and he's carrying a Bible. And the minute he walks in there and sits down, he introduces himself, and we're talking for, I don't know, 5 or 10 minutes. And I said, do you know anything about that? And he said, actually, I do. He said, I know quite a bit about it. He said, are you a Christian? I said, I am. I was saved. And I start talking to him, and his name was Daryl Smith. I'll never forget him. I think about him all the time, pray for him. He said, my father was a pastor, planted churches in a church in Ohio. And he starts going through it, and he knows this thing from front to back. That's my first encounter with somebody after an attempted suicide, after running into this deputy of all deputies. He's there telling me I'm going to be okay. And here comes the guy that for the next year, I end up being with in a cell. They move us to another cell. But so here I am with a guy who completely understands the Bible, is a believer, is strong in his faith, but knows the word from Genesis to the end. And I get to study it with him.
Oh.
So, but my wife too, in that meantime, there was a little time that had gone by that she was writing scripture to me because I couldn't even have a Bible for like 2 weeks. I couldn't have a Bible. They wouldn't give me a book or anything. Sure.
Because of the
opportunity. I don't know what
the risk if it had presented itself again.
Right. So, but anyway, that's my start to my journey, not only of redemption, but of God's grace and my recovery, because my recovery is all surrounded in God's grace and what he did and the people that he's put in my life. So it was not only Daryl, but soon after that, they moved Daryl and I to a bigger cell with no bunks in it. That's just like just like a room. It's just
like a toilet,
a room like this, about this size actually, with a toilet. And there's another guy. So they're like, we're going to move you two over here. But the good news is, again, you get to keep the good news of the day was that you got to keep your mattress and your covers. That was it. But we're all three. So now they say, you're going to go in here because we need that for somebody who's needs to be by himself. He can't be with anybody else. But you guys all, our classification was all that we could be with other people. So they put us in with Bobby's a Christian and a tremendous singer, but knows the word, reads the word. So I'm telling you, this is something you can't make up. So then we would sing, like Daryl knew all these songs, and Bobby would write down songs, and Bobby had written songs. And so it was Bobby, Daryl, and I for the next year sitting in this room. We never left. We left every other day. We got to go take a shower. But other than that, it was me, Daryl, and Bobby in there. Daryl, Bobby, and I in there studying the word. So any question that I had could be answered. And if Daryl couldn't answer it, I would ask my mother-in-law or my wife on the phone when I called them. It was incredible. But that's where I started to be shaped. That's where I started to. Now, when I started reading, it didn't make sense. A lot of things didn't make sense to me. I would go to the Gospels, and God started to open my eyes to. I knew my need for him. I knew my need for a savior, but I didn't understand the whole story. But as I started to read and put things together over the next 7 years, my recovery started to become who I was, because it wasn't about for me, and this won't be the same for everybody, but for me, it started to become not about me, but about what God was going to do through me, right?
Yeah.
It wasn't about my recovery anymore. It was about who I was in
It,
Christ.
that was about the work that you were going to do,
Yes.
the
Uh,
inspirations you were going to cause.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I could talk for days and I could talk for hours because there's so many things that God has done and used and that I see him using today, but that I've seen him using all along the way. Once my eyes were finally open to my need for a savior, um, because I don't have any doubt in my mind today that the reason I'm sober and the reason I don't even think about using isn't something that I talk about daily is because God removed that desire. He took a desire that I've had from my entire life for things and status, if you
Yeah.
would call it that, and a desire to be needed and wanted and the man on
Yeah.
top, whether it be at my job when I was young, whether it be in the cars that I wanted, the things I wanted. He removed every bit of it and gave me a desire for him. A stronger desire, more than I desired to be those things. I desire to be who God calls me to be today. That's what, because my focus is hasn't been while I was in prison on um, staying sober. It was about becoming who God wanted me to be, and that was the reflection of His Son. So maybe for me it was different in that way, but I know that through NA programs, AA programs, they all say that God could and would if He were sought, and I believe that is the only way. Is that if God removes that desire, if you're living in obedience to him and allowing him to guide your life, it won't be so much about that you're a recovering alcoholic, but it's who Nick Barnett is, who Chad Weyland is in
Yeah.
Christ. Now that's always obviously the focus because that's who I was, that's who I am, and because I never want to forget that I'm a drug addict, because the minute I do, I'll think that I can just use one more time.
Yep.
But your ultimate question was, how did I but so that was my journey to there. But so for the next several years, I mean,
How'd you clean it up?
how did I clean what up?
Clean up the mess,
Ooh. So
Well,
I,
before we go there, I don't even want to interrupt you, man. I feel like I shouldn't even ask you anything. I should just let you just keep going.
yeah, but remember earlier before we started, I told you if I get carried away.
No, you're good. You're good. Because you have me on the edge of my seat with all of this stuff because it's all true, and I think that at the end of the day, like this is all real. You know what I mean?
Okay, so if I could, I feel like I got off track with your question. But so if I could just go
I don't
back,
even remember the question, to be completely honest with you.
it was, yeah, I don't either. I had it right here where he wanted me to go with it, but then I'm like, I've got to tell you this so it makes sense.
Yeah.
Um, but if I could just tell you, so my entire life, I've felt a need and a desire for things. The next thing, and this, my story isn't unique in this way. The next thing is gonna satisfy me. The next drink is gonna satisfy me. The next hit, the next thing I buy, the next place I go, the next dollar I make is gonna satisfy me. And it never did. And I thought ultimately I remember when I got my first pound of methamphetamine, I thought, I have arrived. This is gonna do it. I'm gonna be able to go everywhere, do everything, buy everything that I ever wanted. And not once did it fulfill me. Not once. And I truly believe today that God used that, allowed me to make the poor decisions I made, to understand that no matter how much money I had, no matter how many pounds of methamphetamine I had and sold, and the money that came from that, it did not matter, that there was nothing going to satisfy me. And I had to go through that to understand that, to know um, that he was the only thing that was going to fulfill me. And ultimately, my whole story comes to a head at that. Um, for a number of years, so I understood, but it took that and losing everything that I had accumulated through illegal gains, losing it all and not caring, understanding that none of it meant anything anyway. I ultimately still had my wife. Um, I still had my son. I still have a family. Um, but it took me, excuse me, all of those years in prison studying the Word, and I knew when I got to prison, I knew that my faith was real, and I knew that what God was doing in my heart was real when I said that I was going to study the Bible with anybody. In
Yeah.
federal prison, so Christianity is no better looked on in jail or prison as it is out here. It's the same thing, maybe only in a tighter, you're in a smaller area, more confined area. Um, but it's always, oh yeah, you're going to pick up the Bible when you come in here. You're exactly right, because I understand my desperate need for it,
Yeah.
for a savior, and
Yeah.
for what He's telling me and through His Word.
Yeah.
Um, so I did that, and I met some really good people, who committed horrific crimes, in several ways: murders, gang murders, child molesters, and I wasn't very well liked maybe for doing that, because other Christians would say, "Well, you're not going to go to Bible study with those guys, are you?" I'm
Yeah.
like, "Yeah, of course I am. Why wouldn't I?" "Well, he's a child molester." I'm like, "You said you're a Christian. Do you read the Word? Do you understand that His sin is no greater than mine?" "No, it doesn't mean I'd invite him over to my house for dinner with my kids,
Right.
but I'm going to study the Word with him, because who am I really as a Christian if I can't look at him and know that God forgave him? I stole from my mother. I stole from my dad. I stole from everybody I know. Yeah, he's not. You think he's proud of what he did? No, there's something wrong. It's called, a fallen world and sin. And so anyway, I knew that what God was doing in my heart and in my mind was real when I made the choice that I'm going to do this. This is who I am. This is who I am, and this is what I stand for, whether people like it or not. And I made it through my entire prison sentence without any altercations with anybody. And I learned that people respected me. They may not like me personally, because of what I'm doing, but they respected me because I walked the same way every day. And it was only by God's grace and the strength that I got through Him, that I was able to do that, because I knew if I compromised this my first day in prison, who am I really? And I'm still just living another lie in a
Yep.
different way, in a different place. And ultimately, I'm not going to change. But if I surrender to what God calls me to do, He can change my heart. He can change who I am truly. So that's what, I allowed to happen. And God put some tremendous people in my life
Yeah.
throughout the years in prison that ultimately have shaped me to start to redeem me. I remember a guy said to me, and Vernal Smith was his name. He would come into prison when I was in Tennessee, and the one of the first things he said to me is, "If you knew how important it was for you to be there for your son, you wouldn't be here right now." And I'm like, "What?" And he said, "If you knew how important it was as a
That's
dad to
100%
be
right.
there for your son,
Yeah.
you wouldn't be here right now." He said, "You can argue with me all you want, but the fact is you're here, so you don't know."
Yeah.
And I said, and from that day forward, I started listening to him. I mean, he just poured into us and helped us to understand our need, um, who we were, what we're called to do as men, what the Word calls us to do, um, as dads, as husbands, as men of Christ, as leaders. And he started. That's where I began to be shaped. But God has just continued to use people like that, the Rich Nesbits,
Yeah.
that were in there, people who are willing, who have lived it, and who know, um, the ultimate change that God can make in our hearts, and how He can change us. Because again, I truly believe that it's only God's grace that has allowed me to change, and to start to see things the way that He wants me to see them, and live the way He's called me to live, which has ultimately helped me to clean up my mess. Because there was nothing, there was nothing so special about me that God chose me, other than that it would glorify Him. Um, why did my wife forgive me? Why did my parents forgive me? I didn't do that. The only thing I did was went to prison,
Right.
and I trusted. I started reading His Word, started, and I don't know why I wasn't trying to paint a picture for anybody about who I was, about the way I was living my life, and about, oh, I'm this great person now. I never said anything to anybody. I just continued to stay in the Word and trust that God would see me through the time I was at, and people saw that there was a change in me. I don't know how, but
Oh, it becomes very evident that there is one when it happens.
when you're not pushing it and you're
Right.
not trying to get people to believe, which I did my whole life, trying to get people to believe that, man, I got it together. Look at me.
Yeah.
Trying to sell them on something.
Yeah. I have a friend who told me the same thing at one point. Like, hey man, something's changed about you. Something's different. And I can tell what it is. And I mean, it's you find
When
you
you're
find
no longer trying to push the narrative of who you are and how you're living your life, it just shows.
Yeah.
It speaks for itself.
monetary things don't matter to me anymore.
No.
It's all about service.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's when that becomes very real.
Yeah. But so the hardest part I have with sharing a story is how can you, I told you I shared with a group in Ames about just my testimony, but it's very hard to wrap up what God has done and to go this. Um, but all I know is that if you go back, there was times in my life I was so helpless, hopeless, felt, that I was willing to take my life to today. Um, Looking back going, how did I have how did I even get to the point that I was able to do that?
Yeah. What brought you to that point where because you have a great story, Chad. I mean, it is such an inspiring thing. And I just, what compelled you at some point? What was it that kind of struck you and said, I need to talk about this?
Um, well, I battled with it a little bit. I enjoyed sharing it, but again, a lot of my past was doing things for the wrong reason. This I know wasn't, and um, there was a guy who said to me when I got out, there's people that are going to think that you're just hiding behind this Christianity thing, and I kind of laughed and I said, because for the first time in my life, I'm like, that's okay, because they obviously don't know me, they don't know what I've been through, they don't know what my life is like, they don't, and that's okay. People are going to do that, but I thought, when I was willing to start really sharing it, and it's been recently, I mean, I've always been willing to share it, but to truly get out there and share it was when I knew that I wasn't doing it for my own satisfaction or gain, but truly to glorify God and to let people understand, listen, I understand the pushback on salvation. I understand the pushback on God, and that we were made for a purpose, because I was one of those guys that couldn't stand it at a point in my life. Like, oh, here we go. You're gonna, oh, yep. He's one of those. I was that guy in prison. I'm like, oh yeah, look at them. They're on their way back from church, got their Bibles. They're all better now. But it's because I was ignorant to my true need.
Yeah.
So I get all of those things, but I was willing to share it when I understood that it would glorify God, and that somebody might be feeling absolutely hopeless and helpless, and I've been there.
Maybe you could save them from the pain of being in the pit.
Yeah.
Right. Like, hey, just know where this could take you.
Right.
And pull out now.
Yep.
Get those hooks out of you now. Get out of the pit now.
Yep. And even understand that it's not going to, I still, I had to go through all of the years in prison I went through. I had to get to where I'm at today.
Yeah.
And I truly believe that I needed that. My life I don't know what my life would be like. Had I not gone to prison, I'd probably still be using drugs. I might be dead. I wouldn't be a dad. I wouldn't be a husband. I'd be doing the same things I was doing.
All this, your wife didn't leave you.
No. Which I can't really take any credit for. Ultimately, it comes back to her decision. But even bigger than that would be God's grace, God working in her life, not only from the time as she grew up in a Christian home and standing on what she believed. And I've asked her that before, and she said basically that when we got married, I said for better or for worse. And I guess it's just going to be for worse for a little while. Oh. But really, yeah, it was, I can't say that I had anything to do with that. I grew over that time, but for her ultimately to make that decision had nothing to do with me. It was her commitment to her faith, first of all, and then her family. She didn't want, and if it wasn't for that choice, we would have been just another broken home, another son without a dad, or his biological dad. I don't know what would have happened, but thank God I don't have to think about those things.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's the fracture in the family is always like the most terrifying thing that people don't think about in those moments. And it sounds like your wife, she thought about that stuff.
Yeah.
You know, and what the future would hold, and she had faith in you.
Yeah. Yeah. And at a point that not a lot of people did. And I'm sure, I don't know how much support she had for her decision. I know that her family, her mom and her dad, if that was the decision she made, that they were going to stand by her, which that just speaks for the kind of people that they are, and that they've always been, no matter how difficult it might have been for them to sit back and watch and to think, oh boy, you know, because that's a lot of time to invest in somebody to have, ultimately, oftentimes people fall again. But by God's grace, I haven't, and I don't plan to. So, but yeah, she would be the one you really want to talk to, but she wouldn't get on camera, or she wouldn't.
Yeah.
She doesn't like to talk. No. And I do enough for both of us.
Yeah. Oh man. Tell me, what advice, let's go to the other one. If you could go back, what would you tell sober you on day one of sobriety?
What would I tell sober me on day one of sobriety? You can't do it alone, because God knows I've tried, for several different reasons. One, because I like to do things or think that I got things under control, but also because of the shame that came with it. And I didn't want to tell anybody I was a drug addict or anything otherwise than I'm good. I'm good. How you doing? I'm good today. You know, and I would go to meetings, I would go to different places, and I always tell people I'm good when really I was broken. I was lost. I was miserable, but I'd put on that face like I did for most of my life and just, I'm good. And life's good, but it wasn't. But when I learned to reach out to other people like I do today, my problems, I mean, I'm an open book today. Maybe sometimes to the point that it makes people uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But I've learned that it works because I can't do it alone. And chances are, the reason you're doing this podcast is because somebody needs to hear it. You don't have to do it alone, and you can't. It would be a bigger thing to say. You can't do it alone.
Yeah. Yeah, that and trust, right?
Yeah.
What advice would you give to the next guy who's thinking about getting sober today?
Ooh. I want to be, don't give up. Just don't give up. No matter how, I've been at the very bottom of the heap to the point that of taking my life, and by God's grace, I'm still here. But just to not give up. And for me, I'd have to say that you have to believe that God has a purpose for your life. He will see you through it. Doesn't mean it's going to be easy, and we talked about that. But just don't give up. If you don't give up and you keep fighting, I believe that God can work miracles in you that He will see you through it. He'll put people in your life that need to be there if you're willing to accept them. But just don't give up.
Yeah, that, and I think it's not that far away.
No.
Right?
No.
Like when you think back on prison, on to go back even further, like detox, to all the hard things that you had to go through in terms of like letting go of shame, and turning that into guilt and asking for forgiveness, like moving through that process. It doesn't take as long as you might think, and the process that other people have to go through in order to forgive you for those things.
Yeah.
Once you do that, the future is so bright.
Oh yeah.
I think that's one of the things that I would tell someone.
Yeah. I have a friend right now that's really struggling. He's been clean, sober for a year, but he's struggling more than anything with his why would somebody want to forgive me?
Yeah.
And it's crippling to him. And I'm like, you can't save anybody. And even though I've walked through it, you've walked through it, several people have walked through it. That's one thing that can hang you up and drag you right back into the pit. That why do I deserve? And ultimately today I can go to, well, we're all like that. He's a Christian too. And I said, well, you're right. You don't deserve forgiveness, but none of us did.
Yeah.
And God sent his son to die for us. So if your wife forgives you, maybe you don't deserve her. But if you live your life today like you do, that's what matters.
That's exactly
The
it.
things I did before, I can't change those, and I'm not going to let them drag me down anymore. I'm not those things. Yes, I did those things, and yes, I was that person that did those things. But that doesn't mean I have to be today, and it doesn't mean I have to live in those things, because ultimately that will drag you right back to where you were at.
Yeah.
It's keeping him there. So it's a good example of, we talked about earlier, just because you get clean or you get sober doesn't mean that your life's going to be easy. It's going to get better and it's going to be rewarding, but it doesn't mean it's always going to be easy.
No, bad things are going to happen.
Right.
No matter what.
Life's going to happen.
Somebody close to you that you love dearly will pass. Somebody, you're going to fall down. Things are going to happen, and that's okay. But if you have that relationship with God,
yes,
you can get through
there
it.
You go.
Somebody once told me, and I don't know if I told you this, but early on in my journey into sobriety, I wouldn't say that I had been sober yet, but this is something that I learned that was a seed that was planted inside of me. He asked me, he said, he told me, Nick, imagine yourself as a young boy. I'm like, okay. He goes, you're running down the sidewalk. You just got out of school. You're in the clear, and you fall down and you scrape your knee so bad that it's bleeding and it stings. He said, who do you cry out for? I said, my mom. Like that was my go-to, my mom, right? He goes, okay, what if she's not there? My dad, right? I said, nope, not there. As a matter of fact, you're all alone. Who are you going to cry to? And it was a test as to where my faith was at. And, I got there. I got there. It was God, right? But you got to remember to pray. You got to remember to talk to God about things. And I think even more importantly, because your mom is like your parents are like your physical like parents, right? But your spiritual parent is God. And if you can go to him with those things, you're going to be okay. You're going to have somebody to talk to about it. So talk to God, trust in the process, and it's not that far away. Yeah. I think those are.
Yeah. That just made me think of a flood of different things, but because you're never alone. And the more time you spend with God, the stronger your relationship, just as it would be with any other relationship. That some of the times I was the most free in my life and had the closest relationship to God was when I was in prison. There was times that I had when we were locked down for COVID for over a year, locked in ourselves 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, just you and him. And I thrived. And I watched people break mentally, and I'm thriving. But it's because I have that relationship. That's who I cried out to, because I was put, and God used situations that drove me there, as he will out here. He'll use a situation when somebody's desperation. He's driving you towards him. All you have to do is call out to him.
Yeah. He loves having you as a son. Yeah. He loves having you as a son.
No matter what. And right where you're at, right in your filth, right in the pit of your despair and your destruction and alcoholism or drug abuse, whatever it is, he meets you right there, right where you're at. Yeah. Welcomes you. There's not too many people that do that or places that do that.
Right.
But God does.
Yeah. Speaking of loving your son, what's your favorite thing to do with your son now that you're sober?
Ooh. These are good lessons and good questions. A lot of times I'm convicted in my church connection group. A lot of times we talk about, do we look at our kids as being a blessing or a burden? And a lot of times I get caught up in what I want to do in my selfishness, and I see him as a burden. But what I love watching him, when I can just relax and let him be a kid, he loves to fish. And really just watching him in his element. I wasn't there for a number of years, obviously, and thank God my father-in-law played that part and stepped in as that role and shaped my son. But so one thing he loved to do and learned to do with him is fish. And I won't let him watch this, so I'll say it. But he's better than me. A lot of times, I'm telling you, he blows my mind, and I love watching him because he just thrives in that environment. So we live right by a little dry run. We live pretty close to the river. walking distance. But we've got a little dry run. And last year he come up and he said, I can't remember what it was. Oh, he said, Dad, there's walleye in there. And I said, there ain't walleye in there. And he's like, yes, there is. He said, there's walleye in there. And then he told me there was striper bass. And I'm like, he doesn't know what he's talking about. I said, okay, buddy. Yeah, I'm sure there is. And it wasn't 4 or 5 minutes later, I hear him screaming and he's coming running towards the house. I told you. And he's got a striped bass. And I'm like, I told my wife, he got lucky. In it wasn't the next day, he told me there was another kind of fish in there. And I can't remember what it was. I'm like, no, there's not, buddy. I said, that's a predator fish. First of all, it would eat these other ones. And he's like, Dad, I saw him in there. And I said, okay, sure enough. He came up the next day. He said, I told you they're in there. And I said, all right, buddy, I guess I won't doubt you anymore. Yeah. But I love watching him. If he can be outside, he's outside. And I mean, he loves shooting a bow. So I just enjoy when I can settle down enough and just allow him to be a kid and not have expectations of him like I do too often. It's a joy just to watch him.
That what you just said right there, not have any expectations of him and just watch him be a kid.
Yeah.
I think those are the best, like, glowing experiences as a father.
Yeah.
When, you're not trying to shape them anymore. They are who they are. And they're in that beautiful moment of their life where they're just blissful in play.
Yeah.
And you can look at them and you're just like, damn, I'm proud.
Yeah.
And I'm proud of myself for being able to be here.
Yes.
Especially after it took a lot for me to get out of the pit. Yeah. And obviously you as well, to get to that point where you can be in that thrive moment.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. The only thing I don't like is that he tries to pick up every pole.
Yeah.
If there's 4 poles and one gets a bite, he's on it. And then he's to the next one. The next one, you're like, this is mine. Just leave it alone.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Talk to me about what your day-to-day looks like now that you're sober.
Today? So I work, I'm a machinist. So I get up, when I can stay on schedule, I like to get up before I go to work and read the word, even if it's for 15 or 20 minutes.
Yeah.
That kind of sets the tone for my whole day. When I do that and when I can stay focused on that, life is just a little bit different because I have that connection. I pray every day when I get up. It might just be a short prayer, but I do thank God for my health and my freedom, first of all, but mostly not my physical freedom out of prison, but my freedom in him to be who he called me to be. And just thank him for my family and for what he's given me. Not any material thing, but just thank him for the life that he's given me, the people he's surrounded me with, the things that he's doing. And I say, God, let me see what you're doing. There was a song a guy would sing, Lord, if you're saving souls this season, don't do it without me. And a song I think about comes to my head. I just want to be in the room. Matt Maher sings it. He says, I just want to be in the room when you move. Let me be a part of what you're doing, God. That's what I say. Let me, however that is, whether that's helping somebody, whether it's sharing my story, whether it's sharing the gospel that we're called to do. That's how I like to start my day. Do I do it all the time? No, because a lot of times I get in a hurry and just start living. But that's what my day would look like. And then I go to work. I work till 2:00 and I come home and I work out. Because I've learned that that's a big part of, I've worked out for the majority of my life, but that's one thing that kind of keeps me steady. But something I look forward to, something that helps me.
It's your equalizer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Some people unwind with wine and I unwind in the basement lifting weights. Yeah. Yeah. And my wife sings a song when she makes fun of me. She'll say, I'm in a hurry to get things done. The country song. Yeah. That's her says that's my theme song. So if I can slow down, but anyway, so to answer your question, I like to read in the morning. If I do that, my whole day is different. I said that. I go to work. I've been struggling at work lately to be the example and be the person I'm called to be. A shop can be really filthy language and coarse joking and all the things that I'm called to be apart from, and I can get caught up in them sometimes. So I'm working on that there, but then I come home and then Lincoln usually gets home from school about 3:30 when I'm done working out, and we spend a lot of time together as a family. Yeah. So we may just be in the house together, but my wife and I have tried to create more of an environment that we are doing things together, not just being together, but just being together is nice too for me.
Being a domestic dad.
Yeah. There you go.
Yeah.
Good one.
That's the whole thing, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
But one of the core things that I do that is very important is, first of all, talking to him about how his day and getting him to the point, being a dad and saying, hey, listen, there's nothing you can tell me that's going to make me love you any less. And it doesn't matter how hard it is. I want to know whatever's going on at school. I want to know. And you can share that with me. You can be honest with me. And, but praying that communication we have at night before he goes to bed, and just being in the bed with my wife and I and praying with him, and not just praying repetitively, but trying to get him to understand the importance of praying and
the rhythm.
Yes. And acknowledging, hey, I'm really grateful for this. If these things were taken away from you, if your breath was taken away from you, which God can do at any minute, would you be thankful that you had it back? Would it be, it's not just the food we eat. Yes, we're thankful for that. We're thankful for all of these things that God has done, and just trying to get him. So that's what one of my day looks like, is every day getting him, trying to shape him and being a good example to him on who a domestic dad and a Christian father is supposed to be.
Yeah.
But so it's pretty repetitive, but that works for me. I'm a creature of habit.
Yeah.
If my schedule is off, I don't like it. I mean, if it's 10 minutes from the time I get home from work, I'm pretty organized and stern in the way that I do things, which I'm working on. God's not done with me yet. So,
yeah.
But that's what it would look like, being a responsible employee. Being a faithful servant, first of all,
yeah.
And reading and studying and having that time with God and growing my relationship with him, because if I don't have that, I don't have anything. I know that. And I believe that, because I've continuously strengthened it over the years, and he has never failed me. So that's the most important thing. And then work, so I can provide financially, help provide financially. And then being a husband and a dad, those would be the three categories: being a faithful servant, being a faithful employee, and then being a Christ-like father and husband.
Yeah. Right on.
Yeah. That's what my day would look like.
I got Yeah, man. Yeah. So I think we'll wrap it up there.
All right.
I mean, I think that's awesome.
Yeah.
I think we're good.
Very good. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you, Chad.
Yep. That was a nice feature.
Yeah.
You were like, wait for it.
All right. So Chad was my first guest, and I really wanted to go for it. I didn't know Chad before this. I only knew bits and pieces of his story that I had heard from friends or seen on the news. So I just want to put a big thank you out there to Chad for sharing his incredible journey. I commend you for becoming a domestic dad and an elite version of yourself. To our listeners, join the Domestic Dad Project community on Facebook, or explore more on our website at www.domesticdadproject.com. If this story inspires you to get sober or simply become a better version of yourself, you can claim your free 60-minute coaching session by emailing me, nick@domesticdadproject.com. Let's continue supporting each other to break the stigma around dads reaching out for help to get our lives on track while navigating the obstacles of fatherhood. Until next time.